Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending today. Joining us at ZPE for managing the network edge and why your best practices need to have out-of-band management. Our two panelists, introducing them, they'll be helping to define what the edge is today in 2021. How do we manage it today? Some of the challenges, some customer implementations, and then how to future-proof your edge. So joining me today, we've got Sven Launsbach, who's the CEO of Kaimi, who's a managed service provider for SD-WAN and multi-cloud out of Germany. Welcome, Sven.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Pleasure. And also today we have Renee Newman, who's the engineering manager for ZPE Systems, as well as solutions architect and network architect. Renee, welcome.
Good morning, good afternoon.
Great. Well, hopefully everyone's on. We're ready to go. Gentlemen, let's start off by defining what the edge is. Renee?
Yeah, so looking at how we are seeing currently the edges, and essentially the edges is evolving from what we have seen over the last couple of years to where it is today, and probably where it's going to be in over the next 5 years. But essentially, it started off just at your normal branch offices, your shops, your location somewhere in the town or in the next country, to where you can see it now that it's already in your smart cities, in your schools, in your factories, or just in really remote locations like your mining locations, your offshore locations. That could be oil rigs, can be wind farms, can be essentially anything where you have some form of communication infrastructure and some requirement around computing. And around those lines, I would say it's going to evolve over the next couple of years as well, where it might even end up to be at some point even just on your mobile phone or on your laptop, or as close to it as we can make it. So really, the edge is moving ever closer to the end user, to the end system, where you're going to have some form of computing.
Okay. All right. And just a reminder, everyone, if you have a question, we will. It's down in the lower right-hand corner. You can type it in, and we will get those at the end. Sven, you're currently implementing at the edge. Can you walk me through some of the things that you're doing?
Yes, of course. I think the edge is the comfortable way, like you have in a public cloud version, you bring it to your own a little bit. And our implementation are quite often in combination with SD-WAN, what we bring out to the customer. We use SD-WAN, mainly we use SD-WAN from Juniper 128 technology, and combine that with services that are on the side, on the edge, are still important, like some need an Active Directory server, a print server maybe, or a backup system. But also for the private 5G implementation, we use a combination of SD-WAN and a packet core, but it's based on the site, in the site. And all this combination together with one out-of-band management is a perfect way for us to manage that.
Okay. So you're already implementing, collapsing some of the devices down, providing out-of-band connectivity for your customers today.
Yeah, it's one thing I just saw last time. We moved to another office, and from the service provider, it came a guy and brought on the end 3 hardware to us to bring one IP access. It was the router and the fiber connectivity hardware and so on. And I saw the guy was setting up his console and bring a configuration, was a Cisco configuration on the console. And I think for the for the provider, is this solution such a big step to save money on the end, to bring maybe the Cisco router in a virtual version on the edge to bring a firewall on the same hardware out to the customer and manage that for customers. All similar like we do with other services, but there's so much big advantage behind this concept.
Okay. So let's talk about how people are managing IT or it at the edge today. Renee?
Yeah, I mean, Sven just mentioned it on an extremely practical level, right? We still see a lot of companies out there who are managing the remote sites, their edge locations, as if they would be small data centers just away from the main data center. So that typically means that I'm sending somebody out there who knows what he's doing. He's bringing the hardware with him. Sometimes it's pre-configured. Sometimes he has to configure it on site. So really, they are lacking remote access to those sites. They have challenges around updates. They have to manually update those sites. Or as an alternative, they completely build out a remote site with a huge amount of resiliency overhead, which just adds an awful lot of complexity and an awful lot of costs. But ultimately, they're using the same tools, the same designs, the same solutions, which they would use in the main data center for the remote sites. And if you think about that, a company might have to scale up from today 10 to 20 remote sites to a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand in the near future over the next couple of years. The big question here is that even manageable with the same way we are doing it today?
I also will bring another practical story about that. There was one guy before the other guy came, the technician who did the Cisco router. The other guy before, he was the guy, he did the fiber connectivity, just really the fiber connect, bring it together. And this guy maybe could also bring the edge hardware on the side because he doesn't know so much knowledge anymore. And it's only one appointment, one guy, and everything is done, because then maybe the central department just uploading the service to the edge. And it will save you so much money on the end, more customer satisfaction and everything. This is how we do it with our SD-WAN routers. We do it worldwide or European-wide, and we, of course, can't be everywhere. We have service partner everywhere in the world and everywhere in Europe, and we're just sending the edge hardware, the ZPE hardware to them. They install it cable-wise, and we just uploading our services like the SD-WAN router. This is, nobody from us has to go to the site.
So you've already implemented basically true SD-WAN, being able to push configurations out onto a collapsed infrastructure from ZPE.
Not true SD-WAN, we through the ZPE cloud, because through the ZPE cloud, we bring the services, we upload the services to the edge. Even we could take a edge hardware, ZPE hardware, direct from the factory, coming from you, send it to the customer without preparing something, and just bring our services on the platform.
Okay, that's great. So the next thing we wanted to hit on, some of the challenges. What are the challenges in deploying the edge? Renee?
Yeah, so and again, that is more, it's coming more from our end, what we see with our own customers. As soon as you bring a managed service provider like KMI in there, it's changing the picture quite a lot, because that is a huge value which KMI can bring to their customers, solving those challenges, right? But locations are a huge challenge. Ultimately, what that boils down to is what kind of technical knowledge level do I have on each site? Again, if we just have 10 or 20 sites which are maintained for a long time, I might know each person which works more or less in the data center or not. But again, what happens if you have even only 100 sites? the knowledge level on each side is going to be different. The quality of work is going to be different. So that is, it's a huge challenge with the existing way of how you're doing it. And specifically, maybe there are locations where you don't have anybody there at all with any technical knowledge, and you might have to fly somebody in with a helicopter or whatever to get him to that location. It's a huge operational overhead and headache.
But who's doing the task? The pilot of the helicopter? Maybe he can do it.
If we train him well enough.
Because I think I call it not so smart anymore hands, maybe in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, that is ultimately where you want to be, right? You ideally you want to use the people who really need to be there and who have some technical knowledge, but who might not necessarily work in the IT business in itself, but they're still skilled people in their own right, to be able to just unbox the unit, rack mount it, plug the cables in based on a predefined schedule, which can come from you or which comes from the customer, and the unit or then your organization can take it from there, right? Ideally, or what you need at that point is some form of connectivity, and then you can push the configurations down, you can push all the services down, because again, we're talking here about software defined. So SD-WAN becomes a software defined item, security becomes a software defined item. And that solves then directly the next challenge. By doing everything as a software defined service, you solve the extensibility issue. Again, mentioning just 10 sites is one issue, but how do you do it over 100 sites? How to maintain consistency between the sites? How to ensure and how do you troubleshoot sites if there is something going wrong and there isn't any connectivity there? How can you prove, for example, that it's not you, but it's your ISP which is bringing in the line or anything like it? And then that directly leads to the next one, is specifically if you move away from older sites which might still have analog phone lines or ICN connections or anything like it, and you transition them over to an SD-WAN approach where you might leverage LTE, where you leverage 5G or anything like it, then suddenly those units become directly exposed to the internet in a way they weren't before. And that means that you have to, they need a completely different security assessment. You have to look at the way how they are exposed. How do I secure the units? How do I patch them? Simple patch management. I can't just do it once a year. Very likely we have to think about how do I update my SD-WAN controller or my security appliance multiple times a year. So
you can work in a DevOps way. This is a big thing, that you can change your management like in a DevOps. Easily without any big time to change, maybe to do a backup, because I can upload both versions and just bring it in the next version, the next backup on the same edge.
Yeah, and it's but I have to say there then that is a huge, or can be a huge challenge for some organization, because it requires a change of thinking. It's a change of how do I deploy my systems? How do I think about it? We're currently going through a deployment, or I'm currently going through a deployment with a customer, and the way we were able to implement it was literally we have somebody going on site doing the unpacking who has no real technical understanding of our solution. And if something goes wrong, he has a USB stick which has a config on it. He resets the box, plugs the USB stick back in, and 5 minutes later, the box is back up and running and works as before. So getting into that mindset of that I can actually safely destroy the configuration of an appliance and I can bring it back up to a working state within a relatively short time is, I think, where a lot of traditional people have some fears around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So we're actually jumping over and talking about how we're implementing the new edge. Since you've defined some of the problems, getting the right people in the right location, getting connectivity. using smart hands. So Sven, can you walk us through NG, how you implemented them, providing them connectivity, services, etc.?
Of course. The installation, what we did here was without traveling to any location. We did everything from Germany. We sent a gear to China, and on the edge hardware with ZBE, we bring up the SD-WAN on the China side. We use, in this case, we use the Alibaba Cloud as the Alibaba Cloud hyperscaler as our kind of new backbone. And everything we brought up in 2 days. The whole backbone connectivity from China to Germany in the AWS location in Germany. Yeah, and again, without traveling, just from Berlin. And I think the only thing was to send the gear to China. And they cabled it. And even we had to change IP addresses there in China and so on. Everything from Berlin.
Okay, so you shipped out ZPE devices. You never travel. We're able to implement them at the edge using 128T. Looks like Zscaler. It's a very diverse set of applications as well. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Renee, you would, one of the things we had talked about, you had a picture of a helicopter. So can you walk us through your recent implementation?
Yeah, so coming back to the helicopter, quite obviously. We just recently had an implementation with an oil and gas provider, and quite obviously they had a major challenge of how do I get people on site. Quite obviously, as you can imagine, they have a lot of different sites. Some are directly offshore and somewhere out in the ocean. Others are somewhere in locations where it's extremely hard to get to. Think about the most remote locations on Earth. That is typically where they have locations. And for them, it was a big issue because flying out to them it's a huge undertaking. It's not something which is done lightly. They had an existing system there, but it needed to be updated. It was out of date. Specifically, they needed. They were looking for a solution which is future-proof, which they know they can utilize and push solutions out where they weren't even 100% sure yet what that is going to be, because specifically in the energy sector, you can imagine there's a lot of fluctuations there. There's a lot of changes there. So they were looking around a little bit, and then ZP Systems, we were able to, with our partners, to come up with a solution which fulfilled their requirements. So we provided the hardware, we provided the management layer, we provided essentially the out-of-band access, the best practices around deployment, using, for example, our ZPE cloud. Which allowed them to completely unconfigured, ship the units out to their remote locations. Again, they had them cabled up and unpacked locally there. And then they used the ZPE cloud to deploy their solution as needed. They used 128T technologies from an SD-WAN perspective, and they used Palo Alto for security purposes. That was their firewall of choice. And both were deployed as a virtual machine running on their hardware. And in each location, they had actually an HA cluster so that they could safely update the SD-WAN solution or the firewall whenever they needed to. They had that capability directly built in. Here you can see a picture essentially how it overall looked like. But overall, by doing it, they could directly see within a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a huge change in the OpEx costs. Essentially, they were able to remotely manage the entire system. They had low-level access when they needed it, and they had directly the orchestration access to Palo Alto and 128T when everything was working fine, and they could just push changes and everything. And overall, it comes back to what Sven mentioned early on. It came down to the pure fact that they embrace the DevOps, NetOps way, which is looking at deploying these services really through an automated method, very, very similar to what you would see in the cloud. You see it as a service which I'm setting up when I need it, I destroy it when I don't need it, and it's not a big deal if I reconfigure anything because I already have that predefined, pre-configured, and the method how I roll it out is already there. So it's essentially a button which I have to press to get it to that point.
Similar, the same automation you use in the cloud, you can use it on the edge, and you can bring everything together. The
Yes.
whole management, the whole monitoring, and everything.
Yeah, okay. The whole visibility. It's, I mean, specifically visibility. Sven, you mentioned that earlier on is a huge thing on the edge, and it's not just the networking layer, right? It's you're looking at application layer as well. You want to see. Ultimately, it's down to how fast your Zoom meeting is, and not how fast your underlying network is. No, I'm going to say now, nobody cares about the network. Everybody cares about the application. Quite obviously, they're both linked. But ultimately, I'm going to complain because my Zoom isn't working, not because my internet, my network isn't there.
All right. So you're both describing situations where you're collapsing the number of devices. You're providing in-band and out-of-band connectivity, so you can manage those systems. You can update them. And you can do it all through a cloud or a DevOps interface. So that's where you think that's where you're seeing that the edge is moving?
The edge is moving to a software-defined layer, essentially. The edge will be software-defined.
It will serve the software-defined. It will be the platform for the software-defined.
Yeah, I mean, you still need some form of hardware on the edge, quite obviously, right? But that hardware needs to be flexible. The management interface which you run needs to be flexible to allow you to run the services you need and you want.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. So you're talking about ZPE systems collapsing at the edge, being able to run multiple applications, providing the multiple different paths. So that helps to future-proof the edge.
Correct.
Okay. Well, we've got a couple questions. First question. All right. I have 120 sites to implement over the next 18 months. What are some hints, tricks, and best practices?
How many days?
18 months.
18
You need
months.
1 day.
Look, ultimately, but Sven, chime in there as well. We mentioned that already. The way forward is to look at really embrace the DevOps and NetOps approaches. There is part which need to be done in the company before. There is your processes and your way of how you think about those. You need to change. But ultimately, if you embrace it, then it doesn't really matter if you roll out one device, one site, or if you roll out 10, 20, or 100, because it's you ultimately you know that you have consistency throughout your different locations, and it's repeatable. That is what NetOps and DevOps is all about. It's repeatable. If you do it at 2 o'clock in the morning, or if you give it to the new guy who just joined the company today. So okay. That is the way how you have to do it.
All right. So repeatable, automated, in plan.
Correct. And quite obviously, you need the right platform for it. You need all of that needs to be in place.
Okay. All right. The other question, and this is something that everyone I think is interested in. How will 5G impact edge management? Sven, you want to start?
Yeah, I would say both ways. The one way is to consume the 5G for out-of-band management, and even I can use the 5G modems in the hardware also as for the SD-WAN backup and something else, but also 5G on the other level to bring private 5G to the customer. We already did with a service router implementation that we used the service router, did a packet core on the service router on the edge, and used the PoE modules in the service router to power the antennas inside of the private 5G. It means a private 5G configuration only on a service router from ZPE with a packet core on it and a SD-WAN on the platform. That's it for the whole company. We did it for a chemical company, and that's wonderful.
Okay, so you were able to collapse it, implement 5G, put it all in an SD-WAN, and give them network connectivity, management, out-of-band connectivity, all within a single appliance.
In a single box, yes. Okay. Even to power the antennas with that, because the PoE is enough right now for the new LTE antennas.
Okay. All right, Renee, how are you seeing 5G impact edge management?
Look, 5G will drive there a lot of changes on multiple layers. So for one, we from our own side, we definitely we are going to be ready for 5G. We are going to come out, or we are going to support our 5G modems, starting from the summer of this year. But on the other hand, 5G will bring a lot of services with it as well. So it will even drive further that software-defined concept, specifically to edge locations. Personally, I see two big use cases for 5G. For one, you have the traditional one which everybody's talking about, more bandwidth. Okay, so 5G in general, you could use that to even provide failover connectivity to your site. So your main link goes down and you start piping all the traffic over through 5G. That is probably the most obvious one. But on the other hand, there are other standards around 5G which allow you as well to do something like low bandwidth but guaranteed connectivity. I see that as a huge benefit for management, because that could guarantee you access to a site if everything else is failing through that guaranteed layer of 5G connectivity. So that would at least give you access to your remote sites, to your edge locations, to troubleshoot and then bring the site back up. I think around 5G, we will see a lot of interesting use cases, a lot of different use cases. It's going to be a fun time there to see what people are coming up with when they just put their thinking head on.
Okay. All right. Well, we're running out of time. So first off, Sven, Renee, I'd like to say thank you very much for spending the time, these 30 minutes with us. It's really been enjoyable. To wrap it all up, if you're interested, go to the zpesystems.com edge resources. We can help future-proof your edge. There's a $500 Amazon gift card drawing for if you have a no-grid demo. If you're looking for out-of-band connectivity, 5G, 4G, the ability to manage at the edge and deploy, take a look at what we have here. So for the questions that we didn't get to, we'll be reaching out direct. And with that, I'd like to say thank you, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Cheers from Berlin.
Yes.